The night a press conference died, UFC 279. Rows of nameplates under hot lights, bottles lined up, cameras rolling. Everything looks routine until the noise backstage shifts from voices to shouts. In that narrow hallway, too many rivals converge at once. Diaz's crew on one side, Chimaev's team on the other, with Holland, Rodriguez, and Li Jingliang all in orbit. What should have been a media routine turns into overlapping skirmishes. Security rushes to break one up, only to find another 10 steps away. On stage, fighters waiting to be introduced glance nervously at production staff glued to their earpieces. No green light comes. Instead, Dana White himself steps out, and with one line, "We're done here," he kills the entire event. Mics cut, chairs fold, reporters file out. Stunned, UFC 279 remains unique because it wasn't one feud boiling over, it was geometry. Too many flashpoints, too many bodies in too small a space. You can put out a single fire, maybe even two, but when 3 or 4 start at once, there's only one option: shut it down. The cancellation was abrupt, but it taught the UFC its harshest operational truth. Control is the product. If the company can't guarantee control, it doesn't sell chaos, it erases it. When bottles became weapons, UFC 202. This one is burned into highlight reels for a reason. Conor McGregor shows up late, Nate Diaz has no patience, and tension rises fast. Then a chair scrapes, a bottle arcs across the room, and suddenly a wave of cans and cups are flying over rows of media and fans. This wasn't the usual face-off shove, it was a barrage that turned the audience into collateral. Security couldn't keep up because they weren't protecting 2 fighters anymore, they were shielding dozens of people in the crossfire. The fallout hit just as hard. The Nevada Commission handed down fines and community service hours. McGregor later had his penalty reduced to $25,000 plus 25 hours of work, but the message landed. Promoters love the clip because it fuels hype, but regulators see it as risk management gone wrong. The chain of cause and effect is clear. Lateness leads to taunting, taunting leads to projectiles, and projectiles lead to paperwork. UFC 202 is the textbook case of how quickly theater flips into liability when objects start flying. The press tour that turned into a brawl, Jones versus Cormier. Promotion stops are supposed to be photo ops. But in 2014, when John Jones leaned his forehead into Daniel Cormier's at a press event, instinct kicked in. Cormier shoved back, Jones swung, and in a blink, both men tumbled off the stage into a tangle of banners, security staff, and flying furniture. It lasted seconds, but the clip became one of the most replayed press confrontations in MMA history. What made it resonate was its rawness. There was no stunt, no pre-planned gag. It was instinct overriding PR. The UFC milked the footage because chaos sells, but behind-the-scenes policies changed. Barriers got taller, distances widened. Face-offs became carefully choreographed instead of improvised. The lesson was brutal in its simplicity. If your security is one beat late, you're already too late. The belt, the chair, and the close call. UFC 205. Madison Square Garden was supposed to be historic, the UFC's debut in New York. But during the UFC 205 presser, Conor McGregor made sure history came with chaos. He reached across and yanked Eddie Alvarez's belt from the table, hoisting it like a trophy. The belt wasn't just metal, it was leverage, status, and money. Alvarez erupted. McGregor doubled down by lifting a chair, and Dana White had to physically step in, wrestling the object away before it turned into evidence. Freeze that moment in your mind. Dana gripping the chair, McGregor halfway between swagger and violence, Alvarez yelling over the noise. It's theater balanced on a knife edge. A second longer and the press conference could have produced a lawsuit instead of a soundbite. After this, New York events carried an invisible rule book. Who sits where, who touches what, who doesn't move a muscle without clearance. UFC 205 showed just how thin the line is between spectacle and liability. The forgotten fallout, when chaos costs beyond the stage. What often gets missed in highlight reels is what happens after the room empties. A bottle flies at UFC 202 and the headlines are wild, but weeks later McGregor is sitting in front of the Nevada Commission negotiating down a fine. Jones and Cormier tumble at a press stop, and suddenly sponsors are rethinking how close they want their brand logos to uncontrolled footage. Even at UFC 205, when Conor nearly turned a chair into a weapon, the moment ended with Dana White's intervention. But the real ripple effect was in boardrooms and policy meetings that no one ever saw. That's the hidden tax of press conference chaos. Fighters pay in fines and reputation, but the company pays in credibility with regulators and venues. New York only opened its doors to MMA after a long battle to legalize the sport. Imagine if UFC 205 had ended with an injured fighter or a fan caught by flying metal. That's not just a fine, that's ammunition for critics who spent years calling MMA too dangerous to sanction. For every viral clip that drives clicks, there's a quiet cost in trust. Athletic commissions start writing stricter conditions. Insurance premiums creep upward. Venues demand more guarantees before handing over keys. The UFC loves the spectacle because it sells fights. But every time the chaos crosses into real risk, it reshapes how the promotion operates behind the curtain. That's why these meltdowns matter beyond the memes. They don't just tell fans who lost their cool, they show how close the entire machine came to tripping over itself. Each time, the fallout pushes the UFC further toward one truth. You can sell fire, but only if you don't let the building burn. The boiling point without the explosion, UFC 229. The lead-up to Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor in 2018 brought two of the most tense press conferences in UFC history. Security walls dominated the stage layout. Conor unleashed monologues designed to rattle. Khabib, calm and unsmiling, refused to play along. At one point, he simply left the stage early, a silent refusal to fuel the chaos. These events weren't famous for fists flying, but for how close it all felt. The atmosphere boiled without boiling over, and that restraint became part of the drama. Cameras captured McGregor at his loudest and Khabib at his most stoic. Fans sensed that something real was happening, that the fight was already being decided in posture and patience. What UFC 229 proved was that tension itself can be weaponized. Sometimes the biggest statement isn't escalation, it's walking away. The new playbook silences control. Fast forward to recent years, and the UFC has shown a different kind of response. If red flags stack up, rumors of injury, security doubts, or unpredictable dynamics, the presser simply doesn't happen. UFC 303's Dublin kickoff was canceled outright. No stage, no face-off, no headline clip. Fans called it anticlimactic, but from a control standpoint, it was decisive. The UFC had learned from 279 that when chaos feels inevitable, the safest choice is no show at all. This silent strategy reflects the entire arc of press conference history. At one extreme are the melees, the bottles, and the chairs. At the other is the empty stage, a reminder that the UFC would rather sell nothing than sell a fight it can't control. For the fighters, it means less room to improvise. For fans, it means fewer viral moments. But for the business, it means survival. Patterns that keep repeating. Look across these eruptions and you'll see the same threads. Multi-front volatility like UFC 279 can't be negotiated with. You shut it down. Projectiles like UFC 202 make the crowd part of the fight, which means regulators step in. Instinctive surges like Jones versus Cormier prove that one late reaction from security is one too many. Props like the belt and chair at UFC 205 turn symbols into liabilities in an instant. And calculated exits like Khabib's at UFC 229 show that sometimes the strongest move is not to escalate at all. All of it reduces to a single equation: ego plus stakes plus proximity. A press conference is meant to sell conflict while pretending to cage it. But when the cage cracks, fans see the truth. Who's disciplined, who's impulsive, and who understands that every microphone is a match. The reason these moments live forever isn't just chaos, it's revelation. They expose fear, pride, and control under lights that don't let you hide. A fight announcement tells you who might be better. A chaotic presser tells you who can be broken. That's why fans replay them years later. They aren't just promotions, they're truth leaks. And each time the line is crossed, the UFC redraws it tighter, balancing spectacle against survival.